You're listening to CDKL5 in color. I'm Marissa, and on this podcast, I'm joined by my co-host Amanda, and sometimes some very special guests to talk all things CDKL5 deficiency disorder. It's a rare genetic condition caused by changes in the CDKL5 gene. Patients with this condition often experience profound developmental disabilities, difficult to control seizures that start in infancy, cortical visual impairment, and a variety of other health concerns. It's a challenging condition, but we know that by sharing our stories, we can raise awareness, provide support, and paint pictures of our community that can lead to greater understanding and meaningful change for families like ours. Let's jump right in.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Marissa.
How are you?
I'm doing well today. Spring is definitely arriving, and my attitude is maybe picking up.
Yes. Spring is almost here. Today we have a guest. We're welcoming Carol Ann Partridge. She is a mom. She's a social worker. She is chair of CDKL5 UK. Her daughter Amber is an adult living with CDKL5 deficiency disorder. So we're really excited to talk about her life and Amber's life. Welcome, Carol Ann.
Welcome.
Hi, Marissa. Hi, Amanda. How are you doing?
Very well. I'm glad you're here.
It's lovely to be here. Spring hasn't quite sprung in the UK. It's still really cold.
Well, you know, one other thing, you're our first international guest, so we're really excited about that too. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us about Amber. What is she like? What's life like for her? Let's hear about her.
So Amber turns 20 in just over a month, and she's doing okay. It's been quite a tricky road I would say the last 6 months for her. There's been lots of changes. I think you call it exited out of education or came out of education when she was 19 last year. So we were looking at provisions. She was accepted onto a preparation for adult training course, and it started in September. And prior to that, when she finished school in, I think it was end of June, she went to an adult setting. So a very lovely place that's set in a cider orchard about 17 minutes from where we live. So she did that for 8 weeks over the summer. And then she started at college, and it was a mainstream college with this program for young adults with profound and multiple learning difficulties. And the first day we walked in, she kind of looked at me and was thinking, what the heck is this? Where have you brought me? I could see it on her face. And it was so sad because I was walking in, wheeling her in her wheelchair. I mean, she does walk a bit, but I was wheeling her in with her wheelchair with a pack of pads, and all the other young people of her age were, it was their first day of college. And I had a bit of sadness. So I think we all go through that stages, don't we, of grief, the chronic sorrow. And I haven't gone through that for a long, long time. But I think the last 6 months, sort of moving into that adult transition of education and coming out of education, has been really difficult. So she started there in September, and they really were anxious. There was a lot of preparation for her going there, but she probably is the most medically challenged young person that they had. And she just was really, really unsettled for months. And when she would have a seizure at college, they would sort of let us know that the carers that were caring for her were crying and things like that. And it just heightened our anxiety knowing how anxious they were. And seizures increased. She wasn't a happy, normal self. And just the last few weeks, we made the difficult decision that actually college isn't for her. So she has gone to the provision that she went to in the summer, but also did that on a Friday. And she's been a different young lady. Seizures have been very far and few between. She's been happy. The only time she gets a little bit sad is when she's driving in the car with the carer. I think there's probably a little bit of trauma for her, actually, that she thinks she's going to college. And then as soon as they turn off and down the drive with all the cherry trees, apple trees, she's just so happy, claps her hands. So it was a really positive decision, I think, for us, but it was a hard decision. But she's thriving again. She's happy. The seizures are a lot better. The only thing that's kind of in decline is that she's so happy most of the time is that she's not sleeping. So she's really manic. So we're kind of taking that, really, the fact that she is happy. We do have carers at night that do waking nights for us, so we are able to get some sleep. But last week, from Tuesday to Saturday, she had 13 hours sleep, and that was it. Like a Duracell bunny, she has a quick nap and then she's back to it, you know. So that's been quite hard, but she's just a delight. She's just our little blonde bombshell, and we love her.
Carol Ann, you were like the first parent I ran across. When they diagnosed me, they gave me information about IFCR, which you were at that point in time a board member. But somewhere digging around on IFCR's website, I found the Yahoo group that you guys were in. And you had popped in and said, hey, we're over here on Facebook now. And so I think I went and joined Facebook to talk to you guys. And, you know, my daughter being undiagnosed for so long, CVI was her focus. So I was like, does anyone's kid use a cane? And I remember you messaged me and you were like, oh man, most people's kids in here aren't walking. And I was like, oh, I mean, it was just like you very much laid the landscape out for me.
Yahoo group started way before my daughter was diagnosed as well. And actually, I moderated it with another parent before, about a year or so before Amber was even diagnosed. And I started the Facebook group also before she was diagnosed. So that was, I think, December 2008 it started, and she was diagnosed February 2009. It was a couple of months before her 4th birthday. I had asked for the test when she was 2 years old and waited a year, because in them days it took ages for the test to come back. We had a genetic appointment a year later, and I said, have you got the results? And it turned out that they hadn't actually been sent. So it was then sent, and it was probably another 18 months before we actually got the result. And it was, I'll never forget the day, because we just had an inpatient stay and she'd had methylprednisolone, and she was still obviously still undiagnosed, but she had some hematological issues. So we had seen a hematologist professor, and he was getting ready to do bone marrow aspirates and all of that to see if he could find a reason for her condition. We saw him on the Monday, and we were discharged later that day. And at about probably 10 o'clock the next day, the geneticist called and said, I get emotional when I talk about this, but she said, sorry, you were right all along. It's a tiny change, but we don't know how it will impact her. And when you think about tiny changes in the CDKL5 gene, they have a massive impact, don't they? And I was so relieved, but I'd spent so much time on things like PubMed trying to find, research what was happening, rare diseases, because they thought that she'd had, all the way along, they thought that she'd had a number of different other rare diseases due to her presentation. And I didn't know what to do with myself. It was, what's going to happen now? So that was 2009. And I think it was probably another year before I then became a board member of the IFCR, and then another year before myself and another parent set up CDKL5 UK. I mean, such a journey. In that Yahoo group, I think we had probably about 50 parents in there. And then when we moved over to Facebook, I remember thinking, wow, we've got 101 people. And look at it now, I think it's something like 16 to 1800 people in that group. It's been a massive journey. And for me, it's hard to believe that I've been on this journey for nearly 20 years.
How are you connecting with community before you had a diagnosis? Like, what made you even know what CDKL5 mutations were?
Well, there was an article in one of the national newspapers, and what it said was, when my daughter has a seizure at night, I know that I can rest and go to sleep because she won't have another one. And it talked about these star-shaped seizures, so like the spasms. And that is what I started looking. The other thing is that the small feet, Amber's feet were so tiny. And I'd love to buy shoes, and she's got loads of pairs of shoes, particularly Billy boots and Billy shoes, and her feet just weren't growing. So it was seeing that, and then seeing a big article in one of the women's like chat magazines. So I joined the group, and there was the likes of Cheryl, Lita Boltwood, who was the first family that were diagnosed, and some of the early families. And I just kept saying, I remember I just kept saying to the doctor, even the day before we got the diagnosis, I'm sure it's that. I'm sure it's that because of her feet. It's just something about her feet. I just fixated on her feet. So yeah, and then a year later, she was diagnosed.
The story you told at the beginning, Carol Ann, about your daughter moving to the college, it's incredible how much our kids communicate to us about what they're experiencing without saying any words. I remember Gregory, my son, had a new paraprofessional with him. This was a couple years ago. And right away, when I met her, there was something about her that I didn't like. And he was having a huge increase in seizures at school. And he also has a one-to-one nurse at school. And finally, she said to me, this woman is not a good fit for him. And we were able to advocate to switch the person. And so she wasn't with him anymore, but he really struggled. Increase in seizures, just like you said with your daughter. He didn't seem nervous or anything on drop off, but yeah, I'm so glad that she's been able to transition back to a place where she's more comfortable.
We're really lucky, actually, because it's funded by health. So there are two transitions that we do in the UK. One of them is education into adult services, and the other is the transition into care and support, and obviously the medical side of it. So Amber she was funded by the NHS. So we've got a national health service, and we've got a social care system, both of which have got their positives and negatives. But with Amber, because she was very complex when she was younger, we had health funding, and you have to do an assessment every year to meet the criteria for health, probably a little bit what you need to do to evidence to get nursing care. So she was given that when she was 8 years old, and we had a personal health budget where we could employ carers, and she had the same carers for many, many years. Just before she turned 18, we then had to have an adult assessment, which is pretty much the same, but there are a couple of other domains. And the nurse coordinator came out and she did the assessment, and she sat there for 4 hours doing this assessment. Amber was there. She was off school. She wasn't really doing anything. She was just lying on the sofa that day. I think she had a couple of seizures while the nurse was there. And when she wrote it up, it was like she was talking about a different young person. She'd made statements that Amber's learning needs were moderate, that she was moderately learning disabled, that she could choose what she wanted to wear in the morning. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted. She said that she had low communication needs, no psychological needs or behavioural difficulties. So her outcome was she doesn't meet the criteria for what they call continuing healthcare. So her care needed to be met by social care. And what that actually means is that you get far less. And because she's an adult, it's means tested, and she would have to contribute to her own care from her state benefits. So me being a social worker, knowing the system, it said you can either go to a formal resolution hearing or you can go to a formal appeal. Thought, well, I'm not even bothering with a local hearing. So I went to formal appeal. We then had to go through, so it's this checklist that they go through. We went through the entire checklist again for another 4 hours online with senior managers. And actually the outcome is that her condition is unpredictable. She does have communication needs. She does have psychological and behavioural difficulties. Just because they're not standard psychological difficulties that you could give a mental health diagnosis doesn't mean to say she isn't impacted. Sleep condition is a psychological issue. When they're stimming and they're biting, that's behavioural difficulties. So we've been really lucky in that we won that appeal. And I'm thankful that I know what I know. But at the same time, it was such a stressful time for me. I think, what must parents who don't know the system, how must they feel? It must be absolutely awful. Such anxiety provoking, and just waiting for the decision for those 2 weeks was awful, because my carers that I'd had for probably 15 years, if we'd have been under social care, there's no way they would have given us the same package that we had. So we were really lucky in that, because she's health funded and with the NHS, it's not means tested at all. If you need it at the point of need, it's free. So her entire care package, which is fairly large now, so they pay for her daycare where she goes. And we've got carer, a lovely carer that comes in the morning, gets her up ready. She's 28 years old. She's got a brother with Down syndrome who's nonverbal. So she's like a big sister, and it's so lovely to see their interaction. And I think that also is part of the reasons why Amber's so much happier, because it's almost like she's got this peer relationship with Jodie, which is really lovely to see. And then Jodie picks her up in the afternoon, and Jodie likes to say, we sang and danced all the way home. And she gets her ready, gets her meds, tea ready for bed, showered, and all of those things. And then we have 3 nights a week as well. And she's also got access to a respite or short break centre or house where she gets 26 nights a year. So we've got a huge care package, and not everybody gets that in the UK. And it's really difficult when we talk to families who don't know how to advocate for that, because they don't know the system, because it is such a complicated system.
That's something that's very American in the complications of the system as well. I think we still fail socially to give adults any place in society here. Ava transitioning out of high school, they call it transition of this 18 to 21 program that's still within our educational system, which is where she's at now. And I'm really surprised. She's a different kid. She's happy. They go out into the community. They do meaningful stuff in their program, whether it's crafts. Like sometimes they help her break down boxes. And I mean, this is very facilitated, right? I think anyone listening needs to understand that even when our kids have motor skills, you're still facilitating their life. They need support with all ADLs. I've never met a person diagnosed with CDD that could live independently. Maybe I will in my life, but it's hard to think about what 20 years from now looks like with our kids, with the support systems we have in place. It's hard for me to think about the future with no programming. Do you find yourself, like, even though you're sort of stable, like things can change on a dime, I feel like, in this?
Absolutely. And our organisation, we recently held a training programme for one of our young adults that lives in a shared house. And the staff wanted some training into CDD, but also into the young person. And we made this lovely training programme. And in it, actually, we put the video. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a recent video that Colin Farrell did about what he wants for his son. And that set the tone for thinking about what this young lady should be doing in the community, because we want our children to be seen. We want them to take trips out into the community for pub lunches and things like that, because that's what they would be doing, isn't it, if they didn't have CDD. Delivering that training that day, it was such a positive experience, just to share about the young lady, because we tailored it to her, and just to hear and see what their reaction is and how much they loved her as well, being part of their lives. So that was really, really lovely.
That is incredible. That is fantastic. I'm curious. We'll have to connect offline about the training. I need to start thinking about that for people in my home. We didn't know of a lot of adults when our kids were younger. And we know they're out there and that they'll be found at some point, but I feel a little bit like we're still going to have to pave the path in this adult area that we've been paving for the last 20 years, just as a new disease and the uncertainty of the future.
Absolutely. And I think in the UK, there's been a big push to diagnose older adults that have had early onset epilepsy.
Do you feel like the seizures get to be less of an issue as they get older?
I have for Amber. So she, at the point of diagnosis, we decided that we weren't going to over medicate. So she started on vigabatrin or Sabril when she was 4. And then a year later, she got the vagus nerve stimulator. So she's had 6 batteries for that over the years. And we see that when that starts to run low, and it only lasts just under 2.5 years, the tonic type stiffenings start to come back. She does have daily absences, and they are atypical and they can be quite long. But yeah, she's doing well in the grand scheme of things. But I've got friends whose young people are the same age and they've never been controlled and it's never got any easier. And I worry about that because it's difficult in the world of adult neurology to try and get people to listen to you because they're not used to CDD. And they're very precious and they don't like to be told what to do. An example of that is when we had our Amber's first appointment with an adult neurologist. He was excited to see somebody with CDKL5. He said he'd never seen anybody, but in reality he probably has, but they're probably not diagnosed. And all he wanted to do was change her meds because she's still on vigabatrin and it's a pediatric med, but she's doing well. Why would we change something? She was having sort of issues at night, some startles, which we weren't sure whether it was apneic episodes or whether it was seizures. So he arranged an EEG, which she had a couple of months later. So this was just after her 18th birthday. He rang me out of the blue just before Christmas on a Saturday morning. And he said, oh, by the way, I got the results of Amber's EEG, which I'd been asking for from the epilepsy nurse since she, not long after she'd had it. He said the startles that she's having at night are just sleep startles. They're not seizures. And I was like thinking they are seizures. And then he said, but she's susceptible to epilepsy.
No kidding.
My God.
She's susceptible to epilepsy. So I was just dumbfounded.
How can you stand it? Are you able to switch doctors or?
We're really lucky that the only centre of excellence in the UK is in Bristol, and the paediatric neurologist is Dr. Sam Amin, and he was Amber's neurologist since she was 4 years old. And because Amber's under a compassionate use trial med still, we're under him because he has to prescribe it. So we're really lucky that Sam's still involved. Just to prove how positive this is, early December, she had COVID. She wasn't sleeping and she wasn't eating and drinking. And one morning, and she basically went into the first ever tonic-clonic seizure, and it lasted for 50 minutes, 50. So we had to call the ambulance, but also as soon as I was in the ambulance, I messaged Sam and basically he said, well, just give them my number.
It's so important to have those people in your life, doctors that can help you navigate these difficult situations, as they don't end when your child turns an adult. They continue. And
well, adult neurologists only want to deal, if it's an epileptologist, they just want to talk about epilepsy. There's all of these comorbidities, but if you go and look at the literature about CDKL5, that's where a doctor's going to go. They don't talk about behavior anyway. The research in CDKL5 is very neurocentric, which I question that sometimes. In addition, it's very focused on seizures. They don't talk about the behaviors. People don't even, when you talk to people thinking about drug development in CDKL5, and sometimes they don't even realize we have all these behavioral components. Parents don't realize their kids are exhibiting behaviors because when they think of behaviors, they think of maybe more of an autism profile, or which our kids do have a lot of stereotypies and stimming and things. But, there's a lot of behaviors that go on. And if we all discuss them as behaviors, it might be more efficient, I guess, in care. It's definitely a gap that needs to be filled in our, research landscape.
Absolutely. And I think the sleep issues, and, I know other kids really struggle with it. That's huge. Melatonin doesn't touch Amber. We've got chloral hydrate, which is a sedative. Sometimes it might work, sometimes it won't. But I do worry about the impact on her own health by having extended periods with no sleep, because it then results in manic behavior, biting her hand, sucking her hand, all of those things. Yeah, yeah. I think the only unmet need for us really at this stage is sleep has been the biggest issue. And if there was a way for Amber to sleep from 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock or even 7 o'clock in the morning and then have a really bright day, I think that that would have a massive positive impact on not only her quality of life, but also ours.
Carolyn, you've been around since the beginning of the world learning about CDKL5, and we have people newly diagnosed every day. And a lot of them are getting this diagnosis when their children are babies now. The epilepsy starts so early, and the test is not that long or expensive to run. So they run it relatively quickly, and you come back with these little babies who are getting this diagnosis. And when you see gene therapy in the news and you see scientific advances, what do you think what would you say to a newly diagnosed family who wants to know, how come there's not a cure for this yet?
That is such a hard question to answer. Recently, we've had lots of babies diagnosed in the UK. And what I found is that the parents of babies that I've talked to, some have different perspectives. So I've spoken to parents that just want to know if there's a cure, if there's a treatment. There's been parents that just want to know, what is life going to look like for my daughter? What will I need to think about in terms of education, occupational therapy, physio? And there have been parents that have been in denial. And I think it's so hard. I can't imagine having the diagnosis when Amber was that young. Being diagnosed just before she was 4, we had time to get used to it. But I remember shortly after CDKL5 UK started in 2012, we funded with a couple of the Italian organisations. It was almost like seed funding for protein replacement therapy. And that was probably in about 2013, 14. And we're still not there with protein or enzyme replacement therapy. We know that we've been told for a number of years now that gene therapy is coming, and we know that there are about 3 gene therapy products that are out there, but we're still quite a way to get there. And I think that it's really hard for parents as they see their children getting older, the developmental delay gap widens. They're also going through a grief cycle. They've also got extended family that are going through a grief cycle. We experience trauma. We have to learn to think about it as a journey. I've seen lots of parents, even parents that have their children now in adulthood, that they're still holding out for gene therapy and what that might look like for their children. And I think that we miss the opportunity to really live the life and enjoy the small wins with our children. We have to think about ourselves as well. We have to think about if we've got other children. We have to think about how they're feeling. And I think that certainly in the early days, I didn't do that with my older boys. And that caused, particularly for one of them, significant trauma. And he was diagnosed with complex post traumatic stress when he was 20. And when I think about those early years, I was so self absorbed into trying to find the reason for Amber's condition and then supporting other people that I just didn't necessarily see them as needing that help and support as well. And it's really hard, but I think that we can become so consumed in it all, so consumed with trying to find the next treatment when the cure is coming, that you miss a lot. You have to see their personality. You have to grow into it with them, if that makes sense. The focus has to be on getting to know your child,
Yeah.
trying to understand their communication, that how I started telling you about Amber going to college and, me really seeing that's taken me a lot of years to understand the subtleties in her communication. And me and Adrian, my husband, were talking about it the other day, and he was saying it's just so lovely because this week she's been really loud, like really vocal. And, she comes down in the morning she knows that she's got to either go to her wet room or she's got to go and sit and have breakfast. And she will fight you. If she doesn't want to go, especially on a Saturday morning, she likes to sleep in, she won't want to go and have a shower. And she will tell you with her communication, and, she's like this, get off me, get off me. But that takes years. It takes years to learn how our children communicate and how we can connect with them and how they connect with us. Because even the most profoundly affected young person has a way to connect, even if that is just, reaching out for a small touch or a quick side glance. We need to recognize it and acknowledge it for their emotional well-being, but also for ours, to make us feel like we're getting that hug because we've seen something, we've seen a little glimmer of their personality. We've lived this for 20 years, and it is our way of life. It is our journey, and we'll continue on our journey. And to some extent, I look forward to the journey ahead, but I know that it's not going to be easy because of some medical orthopedic stuff that's going to be sort of on the landscape for us. And I think we're always, as parents, we're always going to have to make difficult decisions. And I think as we get older, we just got to take care of ourselves. We just take care of our families and enjoy life and surround ourselves with positive people and people that are going to help us feel fulfilled, and keep the conversation going, isn't it? Keep the conversation going. And that's what you two are doing, which is great.
Well, Carol, thank you so much for coming to talk with us.
Yeah,
No
giving us an
worries.
hour
It's
and
been
a
really
half.
nice.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll follow us on social media at CDKL5 in color on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and visit us online at www.cdkl5incolor.com. Have questions or a topic you'd like us to chat about? Would you like to be a guest on our podcast? Email us cdkl5incolor@gmail.com, and we'll be in touch. Until next time.